The baby's screams tore through the silence of the luxury train like a siren in the night. Crystal glasses rattled. Passengers shifted in their velvet seats, and tension hung thick in the air. The midnight Amtrak from New York to Chicago wasn't supposed to sound like this. Not in first class. Senator Ryan Caldwell sat stiff, his tie loosened, his face drenched in exhaustion. His infant son, Mason, wailed uncontrollably in his arms. The senator's wife, Ashley, pressed her manicure fingers over her ears and hissed, "Ryan, do something." Everyone staring. "I'm trying, Ashley," he snapped, rocking the baby helplessly. The attendants had tried bottles, blankets, even soft music from a tablet. But nothing worked. The sound cut straight through glass and patients alike. Across the aisle, two businessmen exchanged smirks. "You'd think a senator could afford a nanny," one whispered. Ashley's glare could have killed him. "This is humiliating," she muttered under her breath. "People will think we're incompetent." From the far end of the economy car, a calm pair of brown eyes watched quietly. Nia Washington, mid-40s, black, wearing a simple nurse's jacket with her name embroidered faintly near the pocket. She'd been resting her head against the window when the cries began, but now her heart wouldn't let her stay still. She'd heard that kind of cry before. Not hunger, not discomfort. It was pain, real, body-twisting pain that no lullaby could fix. Her instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had saved lives in war zones and emergency rooms. But when she stood up, ready to walk toward the chaos, a young train attendant blocked her path. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. First-class passengers only beyond this point." Nia kept her voice soft. "That baby's in distress. I can help." The attendant frowned. "We have professionals, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "Then why is he still screaming?" The attendant hesitated, looking over her shoulder toward the sound of the senator's frantic pacing. Still, he shook his head. "Please, sit down." Nia sighed, stepping back, her eyes fixed on the trembling baby through the doorway curtain. Sound echoed through her chest like a memory she couldn't forget. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The baby's crying hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten worse. 3 hours into the midnight ride, the entire first-class cabin was unraveling. A woman in pearls complained loudly, a man in a business suit groaned into his drink, and one of the attendants whispered, "I've never seen anything like it." Senator Ryan Caldwell looked defeated. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair a mess, and the powerful image he carried in the Capitol meant nothing here. His baby's pain had stripped him down to a helpless father. Ashley, his wife, was less sympathetic. "I told you we should have flown private," she snapped. "This is what happens when we try to be normal for your image." Ryan didn't respond. He just held Mason tighter, whispering desperate nonsense between the sobs. The baby's face was red, tiny fists flailing in agony. In the next car, Nia Washington sat still, watching the narrow gap in the curtain. Her fingers gripped the armrest. She'd seen babies cry in field tents, hospital wards, even after airstrikes. But there was something in this sound that felt wrong. Something no one up there seemed to understand. The same attendant from earlier passed by again, carrying a bottle of warm milk. Nia spoke softly. "Has anyone checked his breathing pattern?" He stopped, surprised. "Excuse me?" He might be having abdominal spasms. Nia said, "Sometimes at high speed or altitude, babies react like this. I've treated it before." The attendant forced a smile. "I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but they don't need help from Coach." "Coach." The word stung more than it should have. Nia exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. She wasn't angry, not yet, just tired. Tired of being invisible, tired of seeing pain she could fix and being told she didn't belong near it. The train jolted slightly as it cut to the mountains of Pennsylvania. The sound of the baby's cry echoed down the corridor, softer for a moment, then sharper, almost like a scream for air. A few heads turned in concern. Nia stood again. "That's not just crying anymore," she whispered. "That's distress." But before she could move, she caught a glimpse of Ashley's hand pushing the call button, snapping at an attendant like a command. "Get someone qualified, not "Whoever's staring from the back car," Ashley said coldly. Her voice carried. The people around her nodded politely, but their eyes told the same silent story. The train thundered through the night, wheels clattering against the tracks like a heartbeat gone wrong. The crying had turned into a haunting rhythm. 3 hours, maybe more, and people were losing patience. Ashley Caldwell stood in the aisle now, hair disheveled, her voice trembling between fury and embarrassment. "Can someone please stop this noise?" she barked. "My husband is a United States Senator. For God's sake, this is unacceptable." The attendants rushed around with forced smiles, whispering into radios, pretending control they didn't have. Ryan sat frozen, bouncing the baby, whispering apologies to strangers who refused to meet his eyes. Nia Washington watched from behind the curtain, her heart breaking for the child, and for the blindness she saw in everyone else. She'd spent 20 years as a trauma nurse, 15 of them in the military, and another 5 in a city hospital, where colors sometimes decided competence. She knew that look, the polite refusal, the careful distance, the quiet suggestion that someone like her should stay out of the way. The baby's cry hit another sharp pitch. It wasn't hunger. It was pain and running out of time. When Nia finally stood again, the young attendant blocked her for the second time. "Ma'am, please, you can't." She met his eyes firmly. "You don't understand. If that baby keeps screaming like this, he could stop breathing." The attendant hesitated, but before he could speak, Ashley turned, eyes narrowing. "Oh, it's you again," she said. Her tone dipped in sarcasm. "Please, just stay where you belong. This is first class, not a charity ward." The words sliced through the air, sharp as a blade. A few passengers gasped. Others looked away, pretending to scroll through their phones. Nia's chest tightened, but she didn't respond. She'd heard worse in hospital corridors and war tents. She simply nodded once and whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Ashley scoffed, turning back to her seat as if the conversation had never happened. But in that small, tense silence, a few heads turned toward Nia with something different, unease, maybe guilt. For a second, it wasn't the crying that made them uncomfortable. It was her composure. Ryan looked up, catching Nia's calm gaze to the gap in the curtain. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was long enough. The father in him recognized a truth the senator couldn't ignore. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The storm outside grew louder, rain striking the glass like static. The baby's cries had weakened, no longer loud, just strained, broken. Ryan's voice trembled as he whispered, "Ashley, something's wrong. He's barely breathing." Ashley's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "He's fine, he's just tired." But even she could see it now. The baby's tiny chest rose unevenly, the sobs fading into gasps. "Call the attendant," Ryan demanded. "Get someone now." The staff rushed in, panic showing through their practiced smiles. One of them tried to take the child, but Ryan held on. "No more amateurs. My son needs real help." And then, before anyone could respond, a firm voice came from behind them. "Let me through." Heads turned. Nia Washington stood at the doorway, soaked from walking through the connection between cars. Calm but unyielding, her tone carried the authority of someone who'd been here before, not on a train but on a battlefield. "Sir, please," the attendant started. "You can't." Ryan cut him off. "Let her." Ashley's eyes flared. "Are you serious? You're letting a coach passenger touch our son." Ryan didn't even look at her. "He's dying, Ashley. If she can help, she helps." The entire cabin went silent except for the distant thunder. Nia stepped closer, her movement steady, deliberate. She reached for the baby, her voice gentle but controlled. "Senator, hold his head higher. Yes, just like that." He's struggling to breathe from pressure in the abdomen. Ryan obeyed instantly. Nia placed her hand softly over the baby's stomach, pressing and rotating with a rhythm that seemed instinctive. She murmured under her breath, half to the child, half to herself, "It's okay, little one. I've got you. Just breathe for me." The seconds stretched. A full minute passed. And then, a sound no one expected. A soft hiccup. Then another. The baby took a deep breath and released a long, shaky sigh. Ryan froze, staring. He's breathing again. Nia nodded once, eyes glistening. He's okay. It was an abdominal blockage, mild reflux triggered by motion. He just needed the right angle and touch. The silence inside the first-class cabin was electric. Every passenger stared at the woman who had just saved a senator's child. Nia Washington didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply adjusted the baby's blanket and whispered, "He'll sleep now." Keep his head slightly raised. Ryan could hardly speak. His voice cracked as he said, "You just saved my son." Nia shook her head gently. "No, sir. I just listened when others wouldn't." Ashley stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth. Her pride, so sharp minutes ago, was now cracked wide open. "How did you know what to do?" she asked quietly. Nia looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I'm a nurse. I served 15 years as a trauma medic with the U.S. Army. I've seen infants cry like this during evacuations, under pressure changes, in the middle of chaos. You learn to read a body's panic." The car went silent again. Even the attendant stopped pretending to straighten trays. Ryan exhaled shakily, still holding his son close. "You were military?" "Yes, sir. 20 tours. I came home and worked in emergency care till my body told me to slow down. But helping people, that never leaves you." One of the businessmen who'd mocked earlier lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry," he muttered, almost to himself. Ashley's voice trembled. I didn't mean to." Nia smiled faintly. "You meant what most people mean when they see someone like me and assume less. It's all right. Tonight isn't about me. It's about him." She looked at the baby, now asleep against his father's chest, breathing evenly. The train swayed gently, the storm fading beyond the windows. A few passengers began to clap softly, unsure at first, then louder until the entire car joined in. Ryan looked around, overcome. He turned to Nia. "I don't know how to thank you. Just remember this moment," she said softly. "The next time someone offers help, don't check their seat or their skin before you listen." Ashley's eyes welled up, shame and gratitude twisting together. "You have no idea what you've done for us." Nia smiled, standing slowly. "Maybe one day you'll do the same for someone else." The rest of the journey should have been quiet, but silence wasn't what followed. Someone had recorded everything. The crying, the confrontation, the moment Nia stepped forward and turned chaos into calm. The clips spread from one phone to another before they even reached Chicago. By sunrise, it was online. By noon, it had gone viral. Black nurse saves senator's baby after racist wife insults her. That headline traveled faster than the train ever could. Nia Washington didn't know any of it yet. She just wanted to get off quietly when they arrived. But as the train slowed, she noticed something strange. Reporters waiting on the platform, lights flashing, microphones ready. Ashley and Ryan stepped out first, holding their baby close. The press swarmed them instantly. "Senator Caldwell, is it true your wife insulted the woman who saved your child? Do you plan to apologize publicly?" Ashley froze, her face drained of color. Ryan put a hand on her shoulder and turned toward the cameras. "My son is alive because of that woman," he said firmly. "Her name is Nia Washington, and she deserves respect, not headlines." Nia had been standing behind them, trying to disappear into the crowd, but it was too late. People were already recognizing her. One of the reporters shouted, "Ma'am, can we get a statement?" She hesitated. "I didn't do it for attention," she said softly. "I did it because that baby was in pain. That's all." Ashley turned to face her, tears gathering in her eyes. "Nia, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about everything." Nia met her gaze, calm and steady. "You weren't wrong about everything, Mrs. Caldwell. You were just blind for a moment. The important part is you open your eyes." The crowd went quiet. Even the reporters stopped shouting. Ryan extended his hand. "If you'd allow it, I'd like to make this right, properly." Nia smiled faintly. Sir, I already did what was right. You just make sure people remember why it mattered. A train horn echoed in the distance. Cameras clicked. Somewhere behind them, a stranger whispered, "That woman's a hero." 3 months later, the world still remembered the woman from the train. Clips of Nia Washington's calm hands and quiet courage had reached millions of screens. News anchors called her the nurse who silenced hate. Talk shows debated class and race. And for once, kindness was trending. Inside a grand auditorium in Washington, D.C., a crowd rose to its feet. Ryan Caldwell stood at the podium, his voice strong but emotional. Tonight, we honor a woman whose grace turned shame into humanity. Nia Washington reminded us all that compassion doesn't check your seat number before it acts. Applause filled the hall as Nia walked across the stage. The same woman who had been blocked from first class now stood in front of senators, doctors, and veterans. She wore a simple navy dress, the kind she'd once worn under her nurse's scrubs. She smiled shyly as the audience quieted. "I'm not good with speeches," she began. "I've held more broken bones than microphones. But I'll say this, I didn't save that baby. I just refuse to ignore a cry for help. Anyone can do that if they choose to listen instead of judge." Ryan nodded, his wife Ashley wiping tears in the front row. Mason, now healthy and chubby, clapped his tiny hands as if he understood. After the ceremony, a young journalist approached Nia. "Ma'am, do you ever think about what happened that night?" Nia smiled faintly. "Every day. Not because of fame, but because it reminded me that dignity isn't something people can give or take. You keep it, even when the world forgets it's yours." The journalist paused. "And the senator's wife? Did she ever reach out again?" "She did," Nia said softly. "She volunteers now at the children's clinic downtown. Sometimes the loudest apologies aren't words, they're actions." Outside, cameras flashed as she stepped into the evening air. Reporters shouted her name, but Nia kept walking, calm and steady. She didn't need attention. She'd already earned something far greater, respect. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she opened her phone to a message from Ryan Caldwell. It read, "You changed my son's life. You changed mine too. Thank you." Nia placed the phone down, whispering to herself, "That's all I ever wanted." She turned off the lights, letting the city hum outside her window, a city that finally saw her not as a passenger, not as a headline, but as proof that courage still lives quietly among us. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.